yes, that would be much better for us.
A typical inspection might occur something like this.
Good morning. Can I help you?
I believe so. I'm Charles Goodwin from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Office. May I see Dr. Pratt?
Oh, my goodness, you're an OSHA inspector.
What you have just seen is the beginning of a mock OSHA inspection, simulating what could possibly happen in any dental office. Today's seminar was designed to prepare you to deal realistically with such an occurrence, should it happen to you. Hello, I'm Dr. Barry Kaufman, your host for today's American Dental Association seminar on how the bloodborne pathogen standard and the hazard communication standard issued by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration impact your dental practice. Our purpose is to ensure that you are informed of the requirements contained in OSHA standards, that you understand your responsibilities, and that you are aware of your rights, and that you understand what takes place during an OSHA inspection. We will also provide an historical overview as well as a realistic perspective of these regulations. In all cases, it is vitally important that you are prepared to deal with these issues in your office. The American Dental Association is making this seminar available to you on videotape so that as many of our membership as possible may be reached with this important timely information. Our presenters today are ADA's General Counsel and Assistant Executive Director of the Division of Legal Affairs, Ms. Mary Logan, and the ADA's Assistant Executive Director of Scientific Affairs, Dr. Enid Neidl. Each speaker brings a special perspective to our subject. Ms. Logan will begin our program with a brief historical overview and discussion of the dentist's rights and responsibility regarding OSHA. Dr. Enid Neidl will then proceed to an overview of the epidemiology of bloodborne diseases, which are the chief concern of the bloodborne pathogen standard. Finally, Dr. Neidl will provide information on methods of complying, including personal protective equipment, office cleanup, basic record keeping, labeling, and training. To begin, the ADA's General Counsel, Ms. Mary Logan, will address the dentist's legal rights and responsibilities and how to deal with an inspection. Ms. Logan.
Thank you, Dr. Kaufman. My job today is to arm you with knowledge, to help you feel more comfortable thinking about the unlikely prospect of an OSHA inspector walking into your office. I'm going to focus on OSHA from a legal standpoint and to tell you what your legal rights are, your legal responsibilities, and practical aspects of an OSHA inspection. Now, OSHA is not new. It has been around since 1970, and OSHA started conducting workplace inspections throughout the United States in 1971. It was authorized by Congress with a very specific purpose, and that is to ensure that all workplaces in the United States are safe and free of health and safety hazards. Let me start by asking how many of you have a regulatory compliance person assigned in your office? Raise your hand. Okay, for those of you who don't, at the conclusion of this program today, please have someone in your office assigned and ready to take notes, to have manuals, to help tell you about training. Every office should have one regulatory compliance person. It's too hard to keep all of the dates and all the record keeping and training requirements in place and ready for an inspection unless you have someone who has that as a part of their job responsibility. Let's talk a little bit about the history of OSHA and its interest in dentistry. Why dentistry? Well, in 1985, a group of unions went to OSHA and started talking and said, we think that you need to have a standard for the healthcare professions. OSHA wasn't very interested, so in 1986, the unions filed a formal petition asking OSHA to develop an emergency standard to deal with bloodborne pathogens in the healthcare settings. OSHA still wasn't that interested, but they decided that they would work through the ordinary rulemaking process to adopt a rule on bloodborne pathogens in a very orderly and methodical manner. They took comments, they heard testimony throughout the United States, they received objections from a record number of organizations, including the American Dental Association. And in 1989, they announced what they thought would be the proposed rule for the healthcare professions on bloodborne pathogens. It took 2 years after they announced the proposed rule for them to have a final rule in place. And in December of 1991, the final rule was announced. Well, what is that rule? Later on in the program, Dr. Neidl is going to give you the details of what is required for you. And this is just a snapshot that you see of what OSHA requires. It's very basic information, very easy to understand once you go through it and once you are trained and your office is trained on what to do. Universal precautions is the key. If your office uses universal precautions, you are well prepared for any OSHA inspection. There's another OSHA standard that we're going to talk about today that is very important. And I want to give you a brief background on that standard. It's the Hazard Communication Standard. Now, this one wasn't OSHA's idea. It was, again, union's idea. And back in the 80s, a group of unions filed a lawsuit against OSHA saying that they thought the Hazard Communication Standard, which was in place already in the manufacturing sector, should also apply to the non-manufacturing sector of our workforce. And the courts agreed. In 1987, an appellate court ruled that the Hazard Communication Standard must apply to all workplace settings in the United States. That means hardware stores, grocery stores, places like the American Dental Association headquarters building, and your offices. That rule took effect in 1988, and it has been in effect, and if OSHA came into your office today, one of the areas that they would look for is compliance with hazard communication. Hazard communication has been probably the most common citation areas in dentistry. So we're going to prepare you today to be ready for an inspection in this area. Again, here's a snapshot of compliance with the Hazard Communication Standard. Dr. Neidl later today will give you detailed information about how to comply. It's basically an information standard communicating the hazards of chemicals to your employees. What else? Is there anything else that OSHA has to use in inspecting your office? Yes. There's a very handy clause in the Code of Federal Regulations called the General Duty Clause. The basic idea of the General Duty Clause is that if there's no other standard that fits and they find a hazard, they will cite you under the General Duty Clause. Basically, it means that all workplaces must be free of recognized hazards causing or likely to cause death or serious harm to employees. But what does that mean? I think all of us would agree that dental offices are very safe places to work. Employees are not routinely injured like they are in factories and at construction sites. So what does that mean for dentistry? Well, OSHA will look for some very basic things. Do you have doors laying in the middle of aisles? Do you have exit doors that are intended for employees to get out in an emergency? Are those doors locked with chains around the doors so no one could ever get out? It's fairly basic, and if you did a walkthrough of your office and asked yourself, if I were from the fire department or if I were from a safety organization like OSHA looking to see whether my office is basically safe, would it be safe? The last area that OSHA looks at and the last general category of standards are called the General Industry Standard. These are very basic rules that apply to all workplaces in the United States. Principally, this standard is used in the manufacturing sector and other industries. But the basic idea is that employees must be given personal protective equipment whenever necessary due to hazards on the job. In factories, that means safety shoes. In your offices, for example, it might mean wearing goggles when working in a lab to protect things from flying in the eyes. I'm going to explain now your rights and responsibilities during an OSHA inspection. Now, please remember the chances of your office being inspected are slim. OSHA conducts about 75,000 inspections throughout the United States every year. Their priorities are to go to places where injuries are commonplace: construction sites, factories, warehouses, steel mills, other places like that with a large number of employees, large equipment that has electrical hazards, and other concerns where employees might be hurt. Each state has probably 25 to 75 OSHA inspectors. It depends on the size of the state and whether the state has a lot of industrial settings in it. 25 to 75 inspectors to cover every workplace in the state. It's not very many. There have been only about 100 to 150 inspections of dental offices each year throughout the United States. And that means that probably only 1 in 1,000, perhaps, dental offices will be inspected. So why are we doing this? Why are we trying to talk about your rights and responsibilities if dentistry really is not of concern to OSHA and if they don't have the manpower to do inspections of every offices? It's very simple. We want you to be comfortable and ready if the inspector does happen to walk through your door. We want to increase your knowledge and lower your stress. We want you to be able to feel very comfortable saying, when an OSHA inspector walks in, "Good morning, Mr. Goodwin, we are ready for you." Since OSHA has only a limited number of resources available to it, it has to have a set of priorities for conducting inspections. And it's a very reasonable set of priorities. First of all, if there's a huge accident, for example, a chicken factory fire in North Carolina, a Union Carbide explosion, that sort of thing, where lots of people are killed or seriously injured, and there's a serious concern about the safety of lives in a large setting. Second priority would be small accidents. For example, at a construction site, people fall off of scaffolding or they get hit by a forklift truck, things like that. OSHA will always investigate accidents of that nature. Third priority is employee complaints, and this is where dentistry comes in. The chances of OSHA ever walking into your office unless an employee complains are almost nil. If an employee complains, OSHA by law is required to conduct a workplace inspection. So if an employee calls OSHA and files a formal complaint, OSHA will be at your door. Occasionally, OSHA conducts random target inspections, but as you can see from the slide, those are a very low priority. They don't have the resources to do those very often. A random target inspection is what it sounds like. OSHA has a computerized list of workplaces in the state, and they will go out on a random target basis and inspect a few workplaces on a spot basis. What about patient complaints? Or what about complaints from ex-employees? It is possible for